Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. For today's cards, I am using two memory box stamp sets. The first one with the leaves is the Memory Box Grateful Autumn stamp set that I showed in, I think it was my last haul video. It's one of those great big 6x8 sets that is fabulous. And I thought while I was at it to use the Memory Box STAMPtember exclusive, the Fresh Cut Bouquet stamp set. This was released a few days ago. It's part of the STAMPtember collaborations, which means it's limited edition, only available while supplies last. As of doing this voiceover, the set is still in stock, so hopefully it lasts a little bit longer before it sells out. So I really wanted to use it because the package just showed up like a couple days ago with the collab sets for me to design with. And I already had my idea for this leaf set, and I wanted to play along with last week's color throwdown challenge. You know, as usual, I'm behind, blah, blah, blah. So I thought, why not use both sets side by side? Why not? So that's what I'm doing. So I cut into my Precious Arches watercolor paper that I've mentioned this before. It's so hard not to hoard the really good stuff, but trust me when I say this, it's so worth it to actually use it. You get such better results, especially with watercolor paper. Out of all the mediums and all the things, high quality watercolor paper makes such a big difference. I am always way more happy with my results, and I'm no expert. You know, I've been just experimenting and playing along for years now with watercolor, but man, it makes a difference. So anyway, I cut down a piece of Arches cold press watercolor paper. My original plan was to heat emboss because that's just what I do, but I decided not to. So the first piece I was using my anti-static powder tool because I was going to heat emboss it, but then decided to just leave it as is. And both images I'm stamping with VersaFine Clair Fallen Leaves ink. I used this in a previous video and I'm just somewhat obsessed with this ink. I really like how it's not black, but it's also very dark. It's a different look. I already like the VersaFine Clair inks. I use the Nocturne, like the black ink, all the time. So now you guys are seeing me reach for this also because it's like fall colors, fall time, that fall feeling I like. I always reach for dark brown more often. So with both of these images, I stamped using my MISTI because I ended up stamping them a couple times because these are both huge stamps. Each of these pieces of watercolor paper I'd cut down to like 6 inches by 4.5. Because I do plan on cutting them down after I'm done everything, but I wanted space so I could tape them, etc. So that kind of gives you an idea just how big both of these stamps are. So after they're both stamped, I am taping them down just to a hardboard with some painter's tape because I'm going to do watercoloring. And I'm going to use my Mijello Mission Gold watercolors because I haven't used these in a while and I just used them in a recent video. And like all things, when I pull them out again after not using it for a while, I reach for them more often. So that's what I did. And my first step was to do an underpainting. This is something I still need more practice and like experimenting with because I just don't do it very often. I really love, because I got the idea for doing this from Christina Werner because she does it quite often in a lot of her watercolor videos. And I love the look of it. It just gives something. Mine is very simple here. I am just using one color, but if I'd had more time to play and everything, I think I would have done like multiple colors, like the greens and the yellows and the reds I'm using. Those used as a very soft underpainting would have looked absolutely fabulous. But I was a little too scared to kind of risk that. So I just kept it simple and just did a brown. So this is just a sepia brown. I mixed with water. I quickly painted it on. I'm not worried at all about going over the stamp lines like onto the stamp images because I'm going to paint over that with all the color, everything. So you're not going to be able to see it. And I chose this brown and just a light wash of it because I'm going to add more of this brown into these colors. So everything just kind of works together. So like I said, this is part of the color throwdown challenge, which was very fall colors. You know, there was red, green, yellow, and brown. So that's also why I had this, you know, the leaf set, like the Grateful Autumn stamp set in mind. Because these big leaves are, of course, perfect for these colors. And to do all the leaves, I would just wet them first with clean water. And then I was just dropping in the green, the yellow, and the red and allowing them to kind of mix into their own thing. That's one of the fun things I love about painting, especially like when you're going into fall colors with leaves, is you can let them mix and like how the leaves turn, etc. And just the colors, just let them figure out their own thing. Let the colors mix and whatevs. So all of this, I call this easy because it technically is. I just clean water, drop in the colors. And then sometimes I'll just add in more color. So less water, more color to intensify it a bit. But that's it. I didn't go back in and add more layers of color, which always gives it more intensity and, you know, depth and all that. But with these, I decided not to, since I was doing 2 big backgrounds with all of this watercoloring. Again, I've sped this up, obviously, in editing. This is now like 20 times faster than I normally move. I don't honestly know how long these took me. I'm sure they took me well over an hour. As usual, I just had them taped down and I was just sitting and painting. And I was also interrupted a million times because, you know, cleaning the house, doing laundry, dealing with kids, making lunch, etc. So yeah, I just speed this all up in the editing process. But again, to do 2 backgrounds like this, I still think it took me around a good hour, possibly longer. It would have taken me even longer. That's also why I didn't do a lot of like layers of the watercolors. I just kind of all did it in one. Because again, that takes more time. It's always worth it in the end, but sometimes you just don't got the time, and other times it just takes more practice. So I tried to keep this a little more simple. So with the floral image, I'm using the exact same colors, the exact same watercolors, the exact same colors. So the reds, yellow and green, and then that like dark sepia sort of brown color. So I did all the large florals in this cluster with that red, and I added actually a little bit of that brown. That's what I was adding kind of towards the centers of the flowers. And then the yellow, same thing. I added the yellow, but I also would add a little bit of brown to it just to kind of tone it down. And then the brown to these little like branchy things just to bring in all that color. And then for me, anyone who watches my videos knows, I love the splatter. Can't not have splatter. Splatter adds everything. I know some people really don't like the splatter. I get those comments. That's personal preference. Good for you. You know, some like it, some don't. I used to avoid it way back because I was like, no. But now I love it. I love the texture it gives. It just, for me, I think it just gives that extra something. And I know I'm heavy-handed with the splatter, and I'm still happy with it. I love it. Love the look of it. So with these, I ended up splattering actually every color. Like I splattered on the yellow, I splattered on some of the green, the red, and then I'm going to splatter on the brown. Just light splatter in the sense of I used a small brush and did like, they're just little splatters, not like big blotches of color. I just wanted that light bit of just texture added to all of these. So after, I would just like pick up the watercolor with my brush, and then I'm just tapping it on my fingers, making a grand old mess with it, but kind of trying to concentrate the splatter more around the images. And then I dried these with my heat tool just because I wanted them completely dry, because I'm going to add one more bit of splatter, of course. This is my Gansai Tambi Starry colors. I'd already added water to this little well of gold watercolor, and then I'm mixing it up really, really, really well with my watercolor brush so I get a good thick concentration of this gold. And then I'm going to splatter that onto both of these as well, just because these colors, again, it's the whole fall thing. Everything needs a touch of gold added to it because it just looks so nice. So added the gold splatter, and then made sure both of these were completely dry. Set them aside to dry them with my heat tool, whatever. You just want them completely dry before removing painter's tape, doing any die cutting, etc. Especially if you've done backgrounds, you want them dry before you remove the painter's tape. Otherwise, the painter's tape will tear the cardstock. But if it's completely dry and you peel the tape up like carefully and kind of on an angle, usually I have no problems. So peeled off the painter's tape, and then I pulled out the Waffle Flower A2 layers dies, and ended up die cutting these out slightly smaller than I originally planned, but it's because I die cut some green cardstock and some red cardstock to frame these, just to give them a little extra something. So I did that die cutting, and then I pulled out sentiments from both of these stamp sets and some dark brown cardstock, and I'm going to stamp these sentiments with Simon's clear embossing ink. I'd use my anti-static powder tool first on these. This time I'm going to follow through with the embossing. So stamp the sentiments with the clear embossing ink, and then I am going to heat emboss these with Simon's Detail Gold embossing powder. So coat the sentiments, tap off the excess, and then I can melt all of these sentiments with my heat tool, and I spaced all of them far enough apart because I'm going to just die cut all 3 of these sentiments. It's another thing I'm like really loving about the memory box sets is they all have a lot of them anyway, have this very similar, simple like font design. And I actually really like that. I think it, it lets the, design and the detail of the images take center stage. So that's just another little random thought. Anyway, after they had been heat embossed, I die cut them with Simon's Sentiment Label wafer dies. And then my card bases are some like ivory cardstock that is cut to 4 1/4 by 11. And I scored them at 5 1/2. So these will be top folding A2 cards. And both of these, I got to do the insides, of course. So what I decided to do was use those the leaf and the large floral set. I'm going to stamp those on the inside of my cards. So with both, originally I was like, oh, I could just stamp them with like a lighter brown ink. But then I'm like, oh, I always love when I use a bunch of Distress Oxide inks and like ink up an image with multiple colors of ink. And these especially will look, especially the leaves. Love how this looks. So I got the leaf image lined up in my MISTI. I have the inside of my card here. And I'm just using the edges and corners of these ink pads to ink up the stamp. Not worried about picking up the other colors, but I do start lightest to darkest. So I started with the mustard seed Distress Oxide ink, and then I added some peeled paint, and then some candied apple, and then my darkest, which was ground espresso. And just tapping it on, not being super careful with where the colors go, anything like that, and just letting that whole image get inked up with these colors. And the leaf one especially, this is another one of those times where it's like, this would work for a card front. Like, stamp with the multiple colors, maybe add a little bit of splatter, add a sentiment, you're done. More ideas. Anyway, I stamped a sentiment from that set with the Fallen Leaves VersaFine Clair ink. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing with the floral set. So I'm going to get this great big old floral image. This one's a little more tricky inking it up in this way. But again, I'm not super particular about it. I don't worry that it needs to be perfect. That's how I got the smear on the inside of the card. I'm just like all over the place. I couldn't realize where I got that smear. It was before I even inked it up. That's how I got it. But I'm going to stamp over it. I'm not worried about it. Anyway, large image like this, it's a little more tricky. But what I also do is like partially close the lid so I can see the stamp from the other side. But again, using the edges of the ink pads, and I'm not super concerned about it. I just want the ink mostly where it's supposed to be. But I'm also not worried about like, oh, that spot should be green, not red, etc. It's going on the inside of the card. I want that color there, and it just gives it that extra something. So I don't worry about it too much. So again, edges of the ink pads, good to go. These ink pads are obviously picking up the other colors as I'm like inking up the stamp. If it's too much or it bothers you, you can like wipe off that excess ink on your ink pads with a piece of paper towel, like absorb the colors that aren't supposed to be there. I honestly never do this. I don't worry about it. But if you were doing this a lot, or there was a lot of ink and it's like contaminating, like say your yellow ink pad has a bunch of red in it, etc., then yes, like try and absorb up that excess with some paper towel. But I have yet for that to ever happen. So I stamped the sentiment over that little smear I had made before even stamping it. And then both my insides are now done. So now all I have to do is start assembling everything for both of these card fronts. So I layered the watercolor panels with the color cardstock that I die cut slightly larger. And then I just adhered the sentiments onto each of these panels, all using Simon's Craft Tacky glue. Just lining up all the sentiments, and then I would flip over these little card fronts and trim off the excess of the sentiment strips. And then I can adhere these to my card bases, again, with Craft Tacky glue. Once these are adhered, I have to add one little bit of bling because the splatter of gold watercolor isn't enough gold for me. So I pulled out the Studio Caudia. These are the golden sparkle crystals. So they're clear with gold glitter in them. Love these. Gold ones, just gold crystals or jewels would work as well. But I have these. I love them. Wanted to use them. So I sprinkled these onto both of these card fronts, and then I'm going to adhere them into place with more of the Craft Tacky glue and my jewel picker. And then once that is done, both these cards are finished. So like I mentioned, the Fresh Cut Bouquet stamp set is limited edition. I will have links to it. I'll have links to everything I used In the description box below the video, as well as on my blog, I'll also have a link to the color throwdown challenge. You can check that out if you're interested. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting. I really appreciate it. I'll see you all very soon in the next video. Bye!